Welcome. My name is Corey Richardson, and I'm the CEO and Clinical Director of Integrated Care of Greater Hickory. We serve Hickory, Lincolnton, and Gastonia, North Carolina, and we have a variety of recovery services from medication-assisted treatment and counseling to peer support, transitional housing, transportation, pharmacy services, and prevention services. My doctorate is in applied health science research, and my master's is from the College of Medicine. Uh, I'm a licensed clinical addiction specialist and also a licensed clinical supervisor. Today we'll be talking about the 12 steps, and we use these as a evidence-based model in all of our programs. And you may be a clinician trying to gain greater insight into the steps and how to work them in your practice. You may be a patient, or you may just be a person watching this video in early recovery. And so hopefully you can gain some knowledge from this. This is not approved by AA or NA. This is my own lived experience and my own clinical work. And so, and with that, let's move on. So let's get into the steps. So this is the outline of the steps today, and it's good to understand how they break down. 1 through 3 are the preparatory steps. You have to have all your ingredients together before you bake a cake. And this is how we look at the initial steps before we do the work. You got to get all your materials ready before you do the work. The working steps are 4 through 9. The working steps are broken down into 2 separate sections. 4 through 7, you're working on self. And then after you work on self, you move over to 8 and 9, which are working on relationships with others. Finally, when you finish step 9, you move into 10 through 12, which are the maintenance steps. You can't clean your house one time and never have to clean it again. You got to keep it maintained. And so at this point, after you do the working steps, you move into the maintenance steps, and that's how you keep the program going. So let's get started with some of the steps. Now listen to the steps. They're not as unusual as you might think. They really are very universal concepts. But Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob years ago packaged it for the alcoholics. So these universal concepts have been reconfigured for us who are suffering from substance use disorders. But they can be used by anybody. When you look at it that way, these are really drug-free coping skills. These steps are a new way of coping with everyday life. We apply these steps first to get off drugs and alcohol, and then we apply them to the rest of our lives. For some people on MAT, after you stabilize and you're applying these steps to your everyday life, you're able to even apply the steps to titrating off of medication-assisted treatment. So step 1, we admitted we are powerless over, might be alcohol, it might be drugs and alcohol, or something else, and that our lives have become unmanageable. So there is a fundamental concept with the first 3 steps, and the hint for this one is honesty. That's the fundamental concept. So you got to get honest to get started. We start with step 1, it's honesty. And not honesty when it's convenient, it's honest about everything. And so by the time I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, this became pretty clear to me. I had to finally admit that my life had been destroyed with drugs, and it was very unmanageable. In our program, we start you off after you get started, and you can admit you need help with an autobiography. Now, when my sponsor told me about his life, he told me about what his life was like, what had happened, and what his life was like today. So it opened me up in a lot of ways to consider the first step and a little bit of the second step. And so he wanted me to tell him about my life. And I had to prove to him that my life had been destroyed by drugs and alcohol. And I did it through something that was very autobiographical. And we really got into my life. And when we looked at it very closely, we saw that I had a lot of those traits before I ever picked up drugs and alcohol. But that drugs and alcohol had summarily destroyed my life piece by piece. And then only until the end did I realize it. So it's very important to get honest, and it's very important to get honest with one person. And we'll talk a little bit more about sponsorship but this was an important part of that process. So step two, it's all about faith. You got to believe this is going to work for you. So step two, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves, something more than us, would restore our lives to sanity. And it was hard for me to accept that, but he said, because I didn't want to talk about any higher power. And I definitely didn't want to talk about God. And so he told me at that time, he said, you got a bunch of letters behind your name, is two more than one? And I said, yes, it is. So we together can do what I cannot do alone. We could work on this together. And since he knew exactly how to do it, and he had gone through what I had gone through, but was able to stay clean and sober today, that was something more than me. Then we brought it to the home group, and that's groups of people that knew how to do it. That was more than me. The steps have been working for 50 million people for over 80 years. So that was something else that was more than me that was working, because my best efforts have brought me here. And so you start to figure out there's a bunch of stuff that you could use at work that's more than you. Now, I don't know how a cell phone works, is made, and I know how it does what it does, but I use it every day because it works. And so sometimes you don't know how stuff works, but you use it anyway. This is what we're asking here, is you got to have faith that this is going to work, even though you don't know exactly how it's going to work, because it's working for a bunch of other people. So what is this power? So we talked a little bit about it. It can be God for a lot of people. If you don't want to talk about God in the beginning like me, it could be a group of drunks, God, or a group of druggies, because they are doing what we can't do. The sponsor is doing what we can't do. The medication-assisted treatment. A bunch of scientists create some drugs that are helping people get started. And that's something that we can't do, is do it on our own. So you just got to find whatever works for you. And in the process of doing this, you're going to be given telephone lists and suggestions to call people every day and meetings every day. And so you got to figure out what works and then trust in it and then turn your life over to it. So in step three, we said we got to start trusting, and we made a decision to turn our will and lives over the care of this program, our process, our God as we understand God. And that's what I did. If you told me that you were able to get honest about what the disease had done to you, and you told me in step two that you believe that this worked for all these other people, and you believe it might work for you, in step three, you got to take the next step and turn your will and your life over. And so all these little suggestions have got to be rules. I didn't like that idea one bit. And I told my sponsor that. I said, listen, Bill, uh, I want control over my life. I like to make my own decisions. And he said, Corey, your best decisions have brought you here. And he was right. My very best efforts in life had almost killed me. And so he said, if you turn your will over and your life over to this simple program, we can't do any worse than you've done. And so he made some real good sense there. And everybody that I saw in these programs, their lives had turned out pretty good. They had turned their life around. So if it worked for them, all I had to do was take some simple suggestions and do the same thing. So now that I had worked through these first three steps, and it had taken me months to work through them, we finally were able to move over to what we call the working steps. I was of good spiritual condition. So when you decide that you turn everything over, that you're powerless over, means drugs, and you turn your life over, you're left with something that you can work with. So if you're turning all this stuff over that you're powerless over, you're left with something that you should be able to work with. And I didn't really know what I was able to work with. And he said, you're able to work with your own effort. That's what we're going to focus on, is working on your effort, you. Leave everything else at the door. So in step four, we've got to make an inventory. And just like in a kitchen, you keep what's good and you throw out what's bad. We make an inventory of ourselves. I had a lot of bad over 10 years of active addiction. I had a lot of bad. I seemed in my active addiction to collect a lot of bad stuff and throw out anything good. So we need to make an inventory. I didn't know how to do that. So he said, first thing you're going to do is go home and you're going to make a long list of people that you're mad at, you have resentments of, that you'd like to get back. Well, that was something I could do. I was in early recovery and I had a lot of hostility and anger, and I was very upset most of the time. And so when he said, go home and make a list of your people you're mad at, I said, now we're getting to the nitty gritty. I can do that. This other spiritual stuff was hard for me to conceptualize, but I could definitely make a resentment list. So I made a very long list, and I was really eager to meet him the next time so I could go over my list. I wasn't eager to meet him most times, but when I had that list in hand, I was very eager to meet him. So we met at the Greasy Spoon like we always did, and he always had his big dusty big book, and he made me bring mine. And he said, "Well, let's talk about your list." So when he said, "Let's talk about your list," he said, "Who's on the top of your list?" I listed that person, and he said, "Well, what did she do to you?" And I listed what she had done, gave all the examples of how she had done it to me. He said, "Tell me what it affected. Did it affect your money? Did it affect your self-esteem? Did it affect sexual relations? Did it affect your job or your freedom?" And I listed all that stuff. And I thought at this point, he was going to dislike her like I disliked her. I thought that's what sponsors do. They're like friends that you give them a list of resentments and they say, well, let's hate them together. But he said to me, what's your part? Well, that shocked me. I said, I don't have a part, Bill. I've told you what she did to me. And I'll tell you honestly, in my mind, I put him on the bottom of my resentment list because he was supposed to not like her with me, and he wasn't doing what I thought he was going to do. He said, Corey, we already said that we're powerless over drugs, and we said we're powerless over people, places, and things. We're powerless over all of that. So what we do have control over is your part. And you do have a part. It may be only 5% or 1%, but we're going to spend 100% of the time working on your part, that little part. And so that's all we can work on. And so I said, I don't have a part. And he said, well, who picked her? And that stopped me. So maybe I had a little part. So we started to look at what I had done. And when we got honest, and I said, well, I said I was going to be coming home, but I didn't come home. So that was dishonest. He didn't want me to focus on exactly the actual stuff, like I lied about coming home, because then I'd have to say, well, I also lied about the money and then I lied about this. So he says, it's better if you just say I was dishonest. And I could look at all the situations where I had been dishonest in a relationship. And he wouldn't let me say where she had been dishonest. I had to just talk about my part. So then I could talk about being self-centered. Because every time I had drugs in mind, it was all about me. And so he said, not when I had gone off and done this because I needed to do it. He said, all the situations where you were self-centered, that's a character defect, self-centeredness. So you keep going down the list just like that. And I found that I was angry and vindictive and hostile and unforgiving. And I would give all these examples that this is how I was acting in this relationship. And it started to give me a much more well-rounded perception, a more objective perception of the relationship and my part. And when I really focused on my part, I started to come to the realization that the poor girl had picked the wrong person. And so that's where we are today, is that these character defects and looking at my part. Now, he told me, Corey, every addict and every alcoholic at their core is dishonest and self-centered. And so why don't you just write those on any list that you have and start there. And we even say it in our opening literature about dishonesty and self-centeredness. Bill Wilson says the alcoholic is self-will run riot. So the idea of this for us is just put those two down. And I love to hear an addict tell me about being honest. I said, were we ever honest when the police pulled us over? Well, no. You got anything in there? No, I don't. And so, if the whole world was getting nuked, as long as we had our drugs, we were fine. And so he's absolutely right. And even to this day, I want to start with my character defect work with dishonesty and self-centeredness. So that it gave a very negative perception of the person that I had become. And I couldn't figure out how to dig out of that hole. Well, the first thing he told me was to put down the shovel. And second thing he told me is find the opposite, and that's where the virtues lie. I said, well, how do I get there? He said, don't worry about that. Just write the opposite of the character defect. So if you have dishonesty on the left-hand column, you write honesty on the right-hand column. If you have self-centeredness on the left-hand column, you write the opposite, selfless, loving, and caring on the right-hand column. And you keep going through there. I was unforgiving and vengeful. He said, write forgiving on the right-hand side. If I was arrogant and vain, he said, humility on the right-hand side. And you keep going through that like this. And so when I looked at this list, it was very important for me to see what I had become and then where I needed to go. But I just needed to do the behavior, write the list. I don't have to really do the work just yet. He wrote all of this on one page. And if you look at the top, we review the first person on my resentment list. We review the character defects with that line underneath it. And then the virtues there. Now, if you fold that paper where you only see character defects and virtues, you have at least the top of the page missing. You fold that where you can't see it. And then you split the paper in half. And these arrows going from dishonesty over to honesty and self-centeredness over to selfless are still there if you drew arrows. But then if you fold it, you should just see characters and virtues. And then if you fold it again, there's a little list that you'll have at this point with the folded paper of just character defects. And if you flip that over, you'll see just virtues. Now, he asked me about these character defects. He said, if you had a friend and they were all of these character defects, dishonest, self-centered, vengeful, griping, malicious, stealing, you put all these, would you want them to hang around? Well, so no, I wouldn't. And so I realized that the person that I was not a very likable person, and that's how people saw me. I didn't see myself that way. I saw myself as a good person, but that's the person that other people saw. He said, now flip that list over. You see a virtuous person. They're honest and selfless and caring and helpful and kind and peace-loving. And I knew some people like that, and they were wonderful to be around. When I had the chance to be with them, they were really great. And he said, you know, if you look at the character defect person, he said, they're the ones making all the problems. And if there is a problem, they're making it worse. And then if you flip it back over and you look at the virtuous person, they're the people that don't have problems around. They're not causing the problems. And if there is a situation, they're making it better. And my goal was to get from this person, the character defect list, over to the virtuous one. And this is how we got to do it. He taught me the steps. We'll show you how to do it. Now, there is a quick fourth step, and he taught me this in the rooms. It was really easy for me to take everybody else's inventory when I first put down the drugs. He said, the first thing you ever put down, after you put down the drug score, the first thing you picked up were your judgments and opinions of other people. And he was absolutely right. And it was so easy for me to take everybody else's inventory, but it wasn't too easy for me to take my own. So there was a guy that came into one of our meetings back at the clubhouse in Kentucky. And he walked into the rooms, and he made my blood boil. Couldn't stand the guy. So my sponsor noticed this in me, and he said, what's going on? I said, oh, Bill, that guy over there. He's vain, he's arrogant, he thinks he knows everything. And I went on, and he said, oh my, Corey, who does that remind you of? And it stopped me in my tracks. I knew exactly who that reminded me of, myself. So when somebody was able to get that reaction out of me, that in my gut, I realized that those character defects that person had were exactly the same character defects of myself. And it was a real quick way of me first knowing that my spiritual condition was not where it needed to be. And second, it told me what I need to work on in myself. And as time went on, the same people did not elicit that kind of resentment and judgment. The same kind of people elicited a lot of pity. And I felt real sorry for them that they had to suffer with those character defects. Because really, putting down the drugs is not the end result of any of this. Putting down the drugs is the beginning of the work. The character defects are the work. The rest of the work, after you get abstinent. My sponsor told me quickly, he said, drugs and alcohol, Corey, are not your problem. You are your problem. And that was hard for me. But this is why steps 4 through 7 help us fix the problem. So when I brought my list, my inventory work to my sponsor, that's step 5. And what you do is after you do the first one off of your resentment list, you go to the second one. So we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrong. That other human being would be your sponsor. And you bring that resentment list and you work every one of those as a step 4. And he said, go to the next one. And you know what's funny is I looked at all the character defects on the second person on my resentment list, and it looked a lot like on the first. And I went down to my third person on my resentment list, and the character defects were all the same again. He said, do you see something happening? I said, yeah, all my character defects are causing all these problems. I'm the common denominator. And I got a lot of insight into all these situations I was in. I was at fault. Now, step 6, we start to make a difference. And I like to look at step 6 as a fake it till you make it step. We were entirely ready to have God remove all these character defects. How are you going to prove you're ready? You got to act differently. So he said to me, going from being as dishonest as you were to honest is going to be hard. You're going to have to fake it till you make it. Going from self-centered to being selfless, loving, and kind and caring is going to be hard for you. You're going to have to fake it till you make it. I said, well, how does a person fake honesty, Bill? And he said, tell the truth and stop thinking about the outcomes. I would tell people whatever they needed to hear so I get an outcome. And it usually ended up blowing up in my face. Or if I got the outcome I wanted, it was exactly the opposite of what I needed. And he said, and selfless, loving, and kind, how do I get there? He said, well, you got to fake it. I said, how in the heck do you fake being selfless and loving and kind and interested in other people? He said, you got to just fake it. And he said, go to work and ask one of your coworkers about their kids or how their kids are doing, how their family's doing. So I asked a woman at work as a situation that I was in, say, how are your children? And I didn't care, but I looked her in the eye and I listened to what she said. And then the next weekend I did the same thing. I vaguely remember something about her son in baseball. How do you do in the baseball? She told me, and I was a little bit more interested the second time. Well, as this went on, I figured out I was really very interested in how he was doing. And a new person started to slowly emerge. But I had a problem with this term fake it till you make it. In step 1, you told me to be honest, and now you tell me to fake it. He said, well, it rhymes, so a person whose brain is messed up will remember it. And after 10 years of addiction, my brain was pretty messed up. And he said, fake it till you make it is like practicing. You give a little kid a violin and it's screech, screech, screech. It doesn't sound like music, but he's got to keep practicing and practicing. And he's got to believe he could become a virtuoso. And after a while, it starts to sound like music. And so in this process of step 6, and I was acting like a new person and I was ready for these character defects to come off of me. Something underneath there, kind of like when you're chipping away marble, there's some statue maybe underneath there that's beautiful. So I was just chipping away at the defects. I didn't have to work on the virtues. I just had to try to get rid of the defects. In step 7, I realized that there's something missing. There's something to carry me over the finish line, and it had to be more than me. Just like with drugs and alcohol, I had to have trust in something more than me to take away the alcohol and take away the drugs. To take away these character defects, it has to be something more than me. And this more than me is a process. So I was trusting in the sponsorship, I was trusting in the steps, I was trusting in the home group, and I was starting to have a concept of higher power that worked for me. And I gave all these character defects up to that. And when it was convenient, I didn't take them back. And that's how you start packaging this 4 through 7 and working on self. And it's a lifelong process, but that's how you got to 7. When you're of good spiritual condition, then you can start to go back to the other people. So step 8 and step 9, as we said, are working with other people. It's a process. I used to say I was sorry all the time. Hey, I'm so sorry for stealing your car. Can I borrow it? I'm so sorry for taking your money. Do you mind if I borrow some? And so people had heard sorry from a lot of us for a long period of time, and then we go back and do it again. Making amends is not saying I'm sorry. Making amends, 8 and 9, are about making it right. And so in step 8, I had to make a list of people I had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So I had some homework again. He said, bring me a list of people you had harmed, and we're going to talk about it next time. So I brought that list back to Bill, and it's Bill H. in Kentucky, and I had 3 people on the list. He said, that's it? You don't have anybody else? 10 years of active addiction? I said, I can't think of anybody. And so he said, pull out that resentment list. Pull out that resentment list and let's look at it. And then I saw what he was going to say. That was my amends list. Everybody that I had a long-term resentment with, if it was somebody in the grocery store, if it was a this or that, that was the list. I thought, well, I wish I wouldn't have made that list so long. Long list. And so that was the list. I had to become willing to make amends to them all. And some of those people, I just could not see how I would be able to do that. But I was willing to do anything for drugs. I was willing to do anything to stay drunk or stay high. So I had to be willing to do whatever that was suggested. And so that was step 8. I became willing. Step 9, we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except to do so would injure them or others. But believe me, you're not going to be able to try to argue that you would injure all these people on this list if you try to make amends to them. And so you're going to have to make some direct amends. I said, well, some of these people are going to slam the door in my face. And he said, that's what they need to do to heal. Some of these people aren't around anymore. They have died of overdose. And he said, at some point we have to make other amends. We have to do something in honor of these people to make it right. And that might mean working at a shelter. That might mean a whole bunch of stuff. If you've stolen from a company and you don't want to try to get the police to somehow arrest you for it and all of that, you might have to go buy a gift card and then cut it up. So I was working with somebody and he did exactly that. He bought a gift card. He thought about what he had stolen while he was high. He added the interest to it. He bought a gift card and he cut it up. So I mean, step 9 is making it right, not saying I'm sorry. Where the bone breaks and it heals back in normal configuration, a healthy normal healing, it becomes fibrotic and it becomes so strong at that spot. It becomes stronger there than anywhere else on the bone. And so we become stronger where we were broken before. We have resiliency. That what we thought made us weak and helpless actually is where we become our strongest in helping other people. So step 9 is about making amends whenever possible. And it's very hard to do that. You say, you explain to them the exact nature of your wrongs and that you want to let them know that that's where they get a chance to tell you where you forgot some things or that's not exactly how they remember it, and you listen and then you try to make it right. And a lot of us will have that inclination to say, well, she hurt me too. This isn't working her program. This is working your program. And so if you could do this, you have to be of good spiritual condition. This is not about you. If some people need to hang up on you, that's part of their healing process. You are just called to do the work and let the process work itself out. You have finished 4 through 9, the working steps, and now you're going on to the maintenance steps. In step 10, we continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. So you're doing a quick 4 through 7 and a quick 8 and 9, and it's a daily thing every day, of trying to maintain this process of working on self and working on relationships with others. And it gets hard. It gets hard to say, oh man, I should not have done that. How can I make it up to you? And so you end up stop doing all that stuff. And that's a very important part of this process of becoming a new person. And we start to become people that don't want to do the bad thing. Just like you don't want to do drugs and you don't want to drink, you become a person who doesn't want to be angry and lie and be self-centered. You become a new person in this process. Step 11, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with a higher power or process as we understood it. And then we were praying only for knowledge of the will for this process and the power to carry that out. Now, very often in our clinical program, we avoid words like God. And God can be good orderly direction, a group of drunks. A lot of people where we are embrace the word as a part of their faith tradition they grew up with, and they have come back to that. But for whatever reason, it does not have to be a religious concept. It can be what's working for you. And in step 11, we try to continually embrace this process of all these steps together, to apply these steps in our daily affairs. Step 12, working with others. Bill Wilson talks about it in his literature, but the idea for us is we did not get clean and sober. We did not find recovery just for ourselves. That would be very selfish. And you can't maintain it unless you give it away. My sponsor would tell me, Corey, you keep me sober. And that's exactly what it was for us. Until you get a year or more in the program and you've worked the steps completely, you shouldn't really, you may not want to take that responsibility on. It's a suggestion. But the idea for us is you got to carry it on to the suffering alcoholic or the suffering addict. And it may be getting them a telephone list when they come in the door. It may be welcoming them and telling them to keep coming back. It works if you work it. Reassuring them they're in the right place, or giving them your phone number, or circling it on the telephone list so they'll call you. And then after you have a significant time or sufficient time in the program, offering to be somebody's sponsor. But this is 1 through 12. And they all tie together. And in the process of recovery, lifelong process of recovery, we use all these steps every day in different ways. I'd like to just add on at this point just a few things that we have in our workbook. Now, you may be working with your sponsor and have a workbook, and he may or she may give you some suggestions. Let's give you some of these that we like to embrace in our programs. So one is a gratitude list. Now, one of the slogans on the old clubhouse wall was an attitude of gratitude. I tended to only be grateful in my active addiction if I got a hold of some drugs or alcohol. And so it was very hard to be grateful in the beginning, and it was a process to become grateful. Ingratitude was definitely on my character defect list. And so the fake it till you make it gratitude part, this helped that a lot. So we give a little ring bound binder for a gratitude list every day, like you'd write a grocery list. And so one of the suggestions I say to everybody is leave the list out, leave the book out. Leave it by your coffee or somewhere you'll see it every day, because if you put it away, you'll forget about it. The other thing I say is you got to do a little bit every day. Put 10 on that list every day. How much clean time or sober time you have. If you have a higher power that you started to embrace, if you have family in your life or they're coming back into your life, whatever it is that day, put that down. And then when you start putting 10 down, start to change it up every day. If you are alive, if you're healthy, if you got two hands, what would it be like if you didn't have two hands that worked? It'd be a different life. What if you couldn't hear my words right now and you're only having to read these words? It would be a very different life. What if you couldn't see? It'd be hard to get to a meeting, or it might be hard to get a job where you need vision. So we're going to change it up and start to really figure out how we can be more grateful. And there are a lot of ways to do that. And then if you have a rougher day than other days, one of the tricks I have even today is to take a full white piece of paper, copy paper or something like that, lined paper, and with very small print, I fill every single inch of that white paper up with things that I should be grateful for. Things I know in my heart I need to be grateful for. Stuff like my electric bill. If you find something that's bothering you, like an electric bill, figure out why you should be grateful for it. Well, it's my name on there, which means I live at that home. I can write a check for it and the check doesn't bounce anymore. A lot of people don't have electric. Go without electric for a few hours and you know exactly you should be grateful for it. And so if there's something that's problematic, put it down there. If you're having a problem with your wife, put your wife down there. If your husband down there. What if she passed away? You would miss her. And so the idea is we need to find gratitude, even with situations that are bothering us. And if you don't know how to do it, you have a counselor that can help you work on gratitude, or you might have a sponsor, or raise your hand in a home group and they'll definitely tell you how to work on gratitude. In our workbook, before we get onto the step work, we got a full step workbook, and we have those in AA and NA as well. Triggers. We love to use this word in clinical practice, and I think it's the silliest word. What it really means to me is how my disease lies to me. So we have a long list of things that we think trigger us in your workbook, and I'm going to go over just a few of those and tell you why it's really just your disease lying to you. Some people used to say, whenever I'm having withdrawals, I just don't think I can, or cravings, I just don't think I can stop using. I've got to go back. I said, well, that's your disease that's lying to you. Drugs got you in this mess, and you keep going back to the same thing that got you in this mess. That's like throwing gasoline on a house fire. And but we keep believing that somehow we're going to use drugs to get us out of withdrawals and get us onto a healthy life, or use alcohol to stop the DTs. Just one. Every now and then, the addict brain will talk about just one. I've never had just one. I've had just one after another. I've never used moderately. If I think I'm going to go out and drink, and I say, well, I'm just going to have 2 drinks, I always get blacked out drunk. If I have a bottle of pills and I buy it from somebody and there are 10 in there and I think it's going to last me a week, it might barely last me the night. I've never used moderately, but I keep telling myself that again and again. People say it's a trigger. I say it's how my disease lies to me. Angry. Oh, that'll help. I'll use something to make the anger go away. Well, usually when I drink or use, it makes the anger worse. Well, I'm stressed out. Yeah. Usually most of my stress is related to the drugs or the alcohol. I need some energy. Well, I got so bad at the end, I needed drugs just to feel normal. How is that an energy pill? I had no energy without it. See how all of these things are kind of like a disease lying to you. But once my sponsor started to explain it to me, that my disease was lying to me and it kept telling me stuff that wasn't true, I started to grow another part of my brain. It was the recovery in me. And over time, the recovery got louder and louder, and the addiction got quieter and quieter. Addiction never really goes away, but it gets so quiet, I think it's gone. It's never gone, but I usually just hear the recovery. So that's how I look at triggers, and that's how I look at my disease lying to me. How would you get a sponsor? There are a lot of different ways, but let me tell you some of the suggestions I have. One of the things is to think about a sponsor as a dealer in recovery. They got the good stuff. They're the ABC store. They're the local dealer, the local friend that always has it. You got to get some recovery, and you got to get some good recovery. And so when you're starting to look at sponsors in the rooms, if you are heterosexual, it might be better for you to pick somebody of the same gender or sex, somebody that you can relate to, somebody that there won't be any later sexual feelings for, because sometimes in early recovery we start to get these feelings. And so we have a suggestion in the rooms to pick somebody that you would not be able to be sexual with. And if you're homosexual, you might decide to pick somebody of a opposite sex if they're comfortable with that. Or if you pick somebody of the same sex, you want to make sure there's a clear understanding of one of you is straight and one of you is gay. These are just suggestions that have worked for a lot of people. When you're in a meeting and you hear some of the people's talking, somebody may stand out. What they say and what you hear becomes impactful. That might be a good person to call on the phone. That might be a good person to say hi to afterwards. Hey, I really like what you said. It really spoke to me. That might be somebody that might be able to be a sponsor. We suggest in the rooms that you have at least a year, and we suggest that you have worked the steps with your own sponsor and maintain a sponsor. So every sponsor has a sponsor. And that's how we kind of go about that. There has to be some truthfulness. If you get a sponsor, you have to be honest with them about everything. Uh, you want to make sure that there's nothing you're withholding from them. There has to be somebody on the planet you can share with honestly. Uh, while sometimes people in our program are on medication, and we consider medication to be an outside issue, just like politics and religion and some things like that are outside issues. Nobody ever brings a med list to a meeting. We do think that you need to be honest with your sponsor about it, because there will be a time you're applying these steps to getting off the medication for most people, and you want to be honest. You don't want someone to withhold that from you, because some people find that important in the rooms. If the person that is sponsoring you or could sponsor you is not comfortable with that, our suggestion is to be very friendly with them, to thank them for being honest with you, ask them to still be your friend, and even be there when you go to the meetings, and they'll see the authenticity of your program, and they'll see you coming off the medicine. You can tell them, it is not my intention to stay on this medicine. It's my intention to use these steps to help me get off of the medicine. And you'll see. But I'd rather somebody be honest with me than just not call me again. They're going to give you some suggestions or rules that they want for their sponsees, and you should abide by them. That might be a lot of different things, like 90 meetings in 90 days, call me every day, don't make me call you. There's a lot of neat stuff they have. And you would want to follow those suggestions. They may not always make sense to you. I remember when I watched the movie Karate Kid, I thought, that old man is making the young Karate Kid wash his car. He's making do all these different things. I thought that was the craziest thing I'd ever heard of. Well, it made perfect sense at the end of the movie when the wax on and the wax on saved the kid from getting his head knocked off. And so my sponsor was having me do some certain things that I didn't know how they worked, but I knew they were working for him, and I knew they would work for me if I tried them. And so that's the kind of trust I have, and that's the kind of faith I had, and that's why I was able to sustain my recovery. Just follow the rules. And if the person that you really like cannot be your sponsor because they have too many already, you might ask them to be a temporary sponsor. You might ask them to help you find a sponsor. They may have a sponsee that needs a sponsor. They may have a sponsee that needs a sponsee. And it doesn't mean you can't call them. You can still ask them, can I call you every day? Uh, Sometimes people will change their mind after they see your authenticity. So these are just some ideas about sponsorship, and I'm sure other people have other ideas. I have some suggestions for meetings. These are the ones that were given to me by my sponsor. He had some rules, and one of the rules he had was go to the meeting and be no less than 15 minutes early and no less than 15 minutes late after the meeting by your watch. I said, my goodness, I used to like to walk in a meeting a minute before the meeting and leave right before it ended. He wouldn't let that happen. I had to really fully participate with the meeting. And to do that, I had to engage with people before it and engage with people after it. Well, I figured out there was a meeting before the meeting, and then I figured out there was a meeting after the meeting. I started to get people used to know my name, and I used to get to know their names, and I would go sit with them. If they don't know your name in a meeting, you're not really going to that meeting. It's definitely not your home group. Make the coffee, put out the chairs. He had me do all this stuff. He even had me clean ashtrays back in the day, and I didn't smoke, and I was really upset about that. I said, man, I'm not even smoking. Why do I have to clean the ashtrays? He said, if there were drugs involved, every time you cleaned the ashtrays, you'd ask where the rest of the ashtrays. And he made a very valid point. He said, if you would just give me 5% of the effort you gave your addiction, you would teach this stuff. And he was right. If my dealer said, bring some donuts on the way, I wouldn't ask him why. I'd ask him if he wanted sprinkles or not. So the idea is give yourself completely to this program. You don't have to know why all this works, but what it was doing was anchoring me in the meetings. It was anchoring me to these people that found a way to stay clean and sober. Sit where the readings are. Put your butt right there where the reading is, and that forces you to read it. You have to hear your voice in these readings. And I hated reading out loud, but I did whatever he told me. Sit away from the door. I used to want to sit right by the door, and he would wave me over. Nope, we're going to sit over here. there was this idea that maybe if I wanted to, I could slip out, and he didn't want me to do that. He wanted me anchored in the middle of the meeting. I couldn't just sit there and watch the clock. I had to really be engaged. He said, look people in the eye and smile. And I had told everyone I wasn't really comfortable in social situations. He said, well, you sure were when there were drugs involved. So you had to try to be a new person. And I looked people in the eye, I smiled, I said hello. He wanted me to catch a ride with somebody when I didn't have a car. And then when I got a car and got my driver's license back, he wanted me to offer people a ride. And when someone's waiting for you to pick them up for a meeting, it's hard to not go. I didn't like talking in meetings. It's hard to imagine that, but back in the day, I didn't like the meetings. I didn't like talking in them. And he said, well, I don't want you to really worry about what you're going to say. Just raise your hand. So, what am I going to say? If you don't have anything to say, just say, my name is Corey. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic addict. And with that, I'll pass. And that's exactly what I said. I raised my hand and I said exactly that. I think maybe the first time I said my sponsor makes me raise my hand, it got too many chuckles and I didn't say that again. And so the idea for me is to hear my voice in a meeting every single time. And as time went on, I started to offer up my situations in my life. I found that I didn't have problems anymore. If I was sober and on top of the ground, I didn't have any problems. I just had opportunities to make my life better. So I would raise my hand and talk about situations. And then as time went on, I was able to do what everybody else was doing, just offer my experience, strength, and hope. 90 and 90. Now, my sponsor said he wanted me to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And I thought to myself, how am I going to go to 90 meetings in 90 days? I said, do we have to go to 90 meetings in a row or just 90 meetings and we're done? He said, first of all, you didn't mind using for 90 days. And he was absolutely right. I used for 90 times 90 times 90. And I had no problem using for 90 days in a row. So he meant 90 continuous days. Some people will tell you if you miss a day, you got to start over. My sponsor said, if you miss a day, you got to go to the next day. Well, that sounded horrible to me, so I never missed a day. But I gained a lot in those first 90 days. I was able to not pick up, and that was a miracle. And so I said, well, if I don't graduate in 90 days, how many of these meetings I got to go to? And he said, you got to go to enough meetings to where you want to go to them. And he always would speak in riddles like that. And I really miss him today. He was a great guy, and I didn't appreciate him at the time, but he really did anchor me in the meetings. And don't bring all those outside issues. You know, we don't talk about the football game, and we don't talk about politics, and we don't talk about which religion is better. We leave all that stuff out there for a reason. We talk about our recovery. That's why so many people of different races and ethnicities and different gender and all these different people can come together and love each other like a family. I don't have to like anybody in the rooms, but I do. I like them all. But more importantly, I ended up loving every one of them. Even people I didn't even know who they were. I walk into a room and I find family. So leave those outside issues outside. Let's close up with some more suggestions. Get the chips and the key tags. And if you turn them in and get a new white one. The white chip or the white key tag is white because you're waving a surrender flag. And give up. If you're on the battlefield and you wave the white flag, if you're in the boxing ring and they throw a white towel in, you give up. You're done. And so that's why they made it white. Remember what your clean date or your sobriety date is. Mine's July 14th, 1998. It's more important than my belly button birthday. And if you remember when your kids' birthdays are, and you remember when your birthday is, and you have all these different dates that are important, this should be the most important date in your life. All those slogans. They kept talking about those slogans in that old Kentucky clubhouse, that all those slogans all over the wall. And I told my sponsor, I think you guys are trying to brainwash me with these slogans. He said, Corey, I've known you a while, and your brain could use some cleaning. Those slogans right there are roadmaps for living. I didn't mind the drug dealers and the junkie friends and the alcoholic friends to brainwash me, but I sure didn't know what to think about these slogans. These slogans are trying to help you embrace a new way of life and very often they might rhyme. So, and once you start to use these slogans and you start to hang out with these new people and you're starting to get clean and sober, you start to pick up a new language. We have a shared language in AA and NA. You'll start to pick that up. And it's wonderful to embrace that. That's why you can really connect with people inside the rooms after you've been in the rooms for a while. But it does take time for this to occur. One of the suggestions I have off that call list, they didn't give you a list of names so you knew who people were. They gave you some phone numbers. The suggestion is to call somebody every day. People will tell me all the time, I don't know what to say. I've been talking for almost an hour and you haven't had to worry about what to say. You never have to worry about what to say when you call somebody in AA or NA. They know exactly what to say. You just got to pick up the phone and call. Well, I'm not comfortable. You know, I had no problem calling people at 3 in the morning that I hardly knew to see if they had anything. I had no problem, doing all the other stuff, but we're asking you to do something for recovery. We're not asking you to like it or be comfortable with it. We're asking you to do it. This is not a thinking program. This is not a feeling program. This is a working program. The feeling and the thinking comes later. This is about doing stuff, working it. The other stuff will come later. Speaker meetings are really great. You get to hear lived experience and you hear your own story in other people's lives. If you're not able to go to a speaker meeting in your town or your city, one thing you might want to do is jump on YouTube and search AA or NA speaker meetings. They have women's meetings, they have men's meetings, they have women and men speaking, they've got funny, and they've got all sorts of meetings. But you hear all these different people and you hear your own story. Another thing I really liked is Joe and Charlie. That's one of my favorite. It's about 10 hours and 46 minutes or so. And it just breaks down the AA Big Book. I like the AA Big Book, even though I am also a recovering addict, because it was a seminal piece of work that started it all. And every one of those chapters, even the preface, ties to a step. And it's a great read. It's a great listen. And you also want to be able to listen to some of the AA basic text, the AA Big Book and the NA basic text. If you don't have the literature, which is good to read, you can also listen to it on audio. And these you can all download or listen to on YouTube. My sponsor would always tell me, call me before you use, but don't call me after. Like I told you, my name is Corey Richardson. I am also a person in recovery. And don't call me after you use. I want you to call me before. If you're listening to this, I'm available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, holidays and weekends, now or as long as I'm alive on top of the ground. I put my office telephone there and it's answered 24 hours a day. If you need anything, you let them know you want me to call you. I don't care where you are. I'd love to talk to you. I'm not going to tell you not to use. I'm not going to tell you not to drink, but I will definitely start with, do you think it's going to make it better? You didn't come to this video because using or drinking was working for you. You came to make a change. I hope some of these suggestions have helped. And these are the 4 legs of my chair in recovery, and this is what I keep using today. Meetings, 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 meetings. I tell people, put your butt in that seat and your heart and mind will follow later. Just put your butt in that seat. Meetings, meetings, meetings. Don't get a sponsor. Use a sponsor. Okay? What good is having that nice sports car in the driveway if nobody drives it? You got to use a sponsor. The steps. I memorized the steps and I thought if I memorized them, I would be done with them. He said, you got to apply them in your life. And all the available literature, the basic text, the big book, As Bill Sees It, Joe and Charlie, the YouTube videos, so much that's out there. Read and listen to all of that. Meetings, sponsorship, steps, and literature. If you need anything, like I said, give me a call. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can follow what we do on our social media platforms. If you're in our area and you know somebody needs help, you can contact them. I'm very blessed to have been able to reach out to you today. I hope you've enjoyed this video, whether you're a clinician or a patient, a client, or just somebody entering recovery. I hope it's been helpful. And I hope you wish you all the best in your recovery. Thank you.